I've always prided myself on my independence and determination, and it's those traits that helped me build my catering business from the ground up. I started with a humble food truck during my college years, working long shifts between classes to make ends meet. Over time, that food truck turned into a full-service catering company that now employs over 50 people and handles high-end events across Chicago. The journey wasn't easy. There were countless sleepless nights, sacrifices, and moments where giving up felt like the easiest option. But through it all, I built something that's become a source of pride and proof of my hard work. That pride made the events at my younger brother Adam's wedding last weekend all the more infuriating. To understand how it became such a disaster, you need to know about my family. My mother passed away when I was 14, and my dad remarried less than a year later to Karen, my stepmother. Karen had no interest in keeping my mother's memory alive. She made that abundantly clear from day one, and my father, eager to move on, allowed her to erase any trace of my mom from our lives. This created a lot of tension between us, which only grew over time. Adam was only 10 at the time, and he quickly bonded with Karen. I, however, couldn't accept her sudden dominance in our home. The divide between my dad and me started then, but the breaking point came during my college years. While I was juggling multiple part-time jobs to pay tuition, my dad refused to offer me any financial help, claiming it would teach me responsibility. Meanwhile, Adam's private university education was fully funded without question. The blatant favoritism was impossible to ignore, and Karen never missed an opportunity to belittle my efforts. She called my catering business a food truck hobby, while praising Adam's career in finance as a real job. After college, I distanced myself from them. I'd show up for holidays out of obligation, but kept my interactions minimal. 6 years ago, my father and Karen sold our childhood home without telling me. I found out only after they had moved into a new house that all of my mother's belongings, things I had planned to keep, were gone. When I confronted my dad, he told me I was being over-emotional and needed to move on. That was the final straw. I decided then and there to go no contact with my father and Karen. Fast forward to last month. I received a formal invitation to Adam's wedding, enclosed with a handwritten note from him. He said he missed me and wanted to mend our relationship. After much thought, I decided to give it a shot. Despite the history, I wanted to be there for my brother. To extend an olive branch, I even offered to cater his wedding at a significant discount. He declined politely, saying they had already booked another company. I was a little hurt, but I let it go. When the wedding day arrived, I went with cautious optimism. The venue in Lake Forest was stunning, and Adam genuinely seemed happy to see me. That was a relief. Karen, on the other hand, hadn't changed. She greeted me with a condescending smile and wasted no time making snide remarks about my appearance and business. I brushed it off, determined not to let her ruin my mood. The ceremony itself was beautiful, but the seating arrangements at the reception told another story. I was placed at a distant table with cousins I barely knew. It was a clear message that I was still an outsider. The evening took a darker turn when my dad, clearly drunk, approached me at my table. He accused me of crashing the wedding despite my formal invitation and called me an embarrassment to the family. Karen chimed in, making sarcastic remarks about how much I must be earning as a restaurant owner. I felt my blood boil, but instead of responding, I decided to leave quietly. Engaging with them would only escalate the situation. As I walked to my car, I noticed the catering staff setting up for the main course. Something about them looked familiar. Then it hit me. This was my company. My business partner had recently acquired a smaller catering company, and I hadn't been involved in the logistics for this event. I called my operations manager to confirm, and sure enough, it was our event. That's when I made a decision. If my presence was such a problem, then surely they wouldn't want my company catering their wedding either. I instructed my team to pack everything up and leave. It was a bold move, but it felt justified. Within 15 minutes, my staff had loaded the trucks and were gone. The fallout was immediate. Chaos erupted as guests realized there would be no main course or dessert. My dad tried to intervene, but the contract, originally signed by Adam's wedding planner, had a clause allowing termination of service in cases of hostile or discriminatory behavior toward staff or ownership. I left my business card with the venue manager and told her to have my father contact my lawyer if there were any disputes. By the time I got home, my phone was flooded with messages from family members accusing me of being selfish and petty. Adam sent a long text blaming me for ruining his wedding and claiming I had proven Karen right about me all along. My father threatened to sue for breach of contract, but I forwarded everything to my lawyer and blocked their numbers. I couldn't believe the nerve of these people. All I did was stand up for myself and my company. After the wedding fiasco, I expected some blowback, but the sheer volume of it was overwhelming. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls and texts. Most of them were angry messages from family members calling me selfish, accusing me of ruining the wedding. Adam's text stung the most. He said I'd embarrassed him in front of his new wife and her family, adding that Karen had been right about me all along. He claimed I'd proven I couldn't let go of the past and had made his wedding about myself. What hurt even more was that Adam didn't defend me during the wedding. He saw how Karen and Dad treated me. He saw the drunken insults and the sarcastic jabs, yet he said nothing. I'd come to the wedding hoping to repair some of the damage between us, but it seemed like I'd only deepened the rift. Then came Dad's threats. He said he'd sue me for breach of contract, claiming I'd deliberately sabotaged Adam's big day. I wasn't worried, though. My lawyer had already reviewed the catering contract, which included a clause that allowed termination in cases of hostility or discrimination towards staff or ownership. My father and Karen's behavior at the wedding fit the description perfectly. To cover my bases, I also contacted the venue manager. She confirmed their security cameras had captured the entire exchange. While the audio wasn't perfect, it clearly showed Dad berating me and Karen joining in with her snide remarks. The contract was solid, and with video evidence backing me up, I knew any legal threats were empty. Still, the situation weighed on me. I didn't want to spend my time and energy on this nonsense, but I wasn't about to let my father and Karen bully me into submission. I forwarded all their messages to my lawyer, blocked their numbers, and tried to focus on moving forward. Surprisingly, not all the reactions were negative. A few wedding guests reached out to me privately, apologizing for how I was treated. Some had witnessed the confrontation and were appalled by Dad and Karen's behavior. One even commented that they admired how my team handled the situation, packing up professionally and leaving without creating a bigger scene. The support was unexpected, but validating. It reminded me that not everyone in the family was blind to the toxicity I'd been dealing with for years. But despite the positive messages, the incident had sparked something bigger than I had anticipated. Word spread quickly about the wedding drama, and soon it became the talk of Adam's social circle. Mutual acquaintances reached out to let me know that Karen was spinning the story in her favor. She claimed I'd sabotaged the wedding on purpose out of jealousy and spite, painting herself and Dad as the victims. But the truth had already started leaking out. People knew about Karen's meddling and manipulative behavior, and her narrative wasn't holding up. Meanwhile, my lawyer sent a formal letter to Dad's attorney explaining the situation. We laid out the details, emphasizing the clause in the contract that allowed us to terminate services due to their hostile behavior. We even mentioned the video evidence and made it clear we were prepared to use it if necessary. For a while, it seemed like Dad and Karen were doubling down on their threats. I braced myself for a drawn-out legal battle, but then something shifted. After a week of silence, Dad's lawyer contacted mine. They were willing to accept a partial refund and sign a non-disclosure agreement, NDA. The agreement would prevent them from discussing the incident publicly or leaving negative reviews about my company. I agreed to the terms. We refunded 50% of their deposit, minus the costs already incurred for food and staff. Once the papers were signed and the refund processed, I thought I could finally put the legal aspect behind me. But Karen, being Karen, wasn't done yet. She began targeting my business. She tried to post negative reviews about my company online, claiming we'd ruined the wedding and sabotaged her family. Thankfully, the venue manager, who'd already dealt with Karen's antics during the planning process, stepped in. She blocked Karen's attempts to leave fake reviews and even notified me about what was happening. Karen didn't stop there, though. She started reaching out to my business partners, spreading false claims about my character and accusing me of intentionally causing problems at the wedding. It was exhausting to deal with, but I wasn't about to let her destroy what I'd built. My legal team sent her a cease and desist letter, warning her that further attempts to defame me or my company would result in legal action. While Karen's efforts to undermine me continued, an unexpected development came from Adam. Through a mutual cousin, I learned that his new wife, Emma, had confronted him about what happened at the wedding. Apparently, she was horrified by how Dad and Karen treated me and felt Adam should have stood up for me. The confrontation between Adam and Emma led to their first major argument as a married couple. Emma told him in no uncertain terms that his silence during the wedding was unacceptable. From what I heard, the argument was so heated that they postponed their honeymoon to work through their issues. Hearing about this left me with mixed emotions. On one hand, it was validating to know that someone else saw the situation for what it was. Emma's reaction proved that I wasn't crazy or overreacting. But on the other hand, I felt bad for Adam. He was clearly in a tough spot, torn between his loyalty to his wife and his deep-seated fear of standing up to Dad and Karen. As the dust settled, I started to feel a strange mix of relief and sadness. I knew I'd done the right thing by standing up for myself, but the fallout was heavier than I'd anticipated. The divide between me and my family felt wider than ever, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. In the weeks following the wedding, things didn't calm down, they only got more complicated. While the legal side of things was settled with the partial refund and NDA, the personal fallout was still rippling through my family. Karen, unsurprisingly, wasn't done causing chaos. She continued reaching out to anyone she could think of, my employees, my business partners, even mutual acquaintances, to spread her twisted version of events. Thankfully, most people saw through her. My employees were fiercely loyal, refusing to engage with her phishing attempts for company information. My business partners, many of whom knew me personally, either ignored her or forwarded her messages to me directly. But it was exhausting. Every day felt like a new round of damage control. One morning, my operations manager called me with some unsettling news. Karen had been trying to book a fake event under an alias, hoping to inspect our operations firsthand. We flagged it immediately, but it was yet another reminder of how far she was willing to go. My lawyer sent her another cease and desist letter, reiterating that her actions were bordering on harassment and defamation. But amidst all this chaos, the most surprising development came from Adam's wife, Emma. She reached out to me directly. Her message was calm and heartfelt. She apologized for what had happened at the wedding and told me that she didn't condone how I'd been treated. She said she'd been deeply embarrassed by Dad and Karen's behavior and had confronted Adam about his failure to stand up for me. Emma went on to explain that their argument after the wedding had been a wake-up call for Adam. She said he'd admitted he felt trapped, torn between loyalty to Dad and Karen and his growing awareness of how toxic their behavior had been. Apparently, Emma wasn't letting him off the hook easily. She'd insisted they address these issues head-on before moving forward in their marriage. Hearing this was bittersweet. I respected Emma for standing up for me and holding Adam accountable, but it also stirred up old feelings of resentment. Why hadn't Adam stood up for me years ago? Why did it take someone else to force him to acknowledge what I'd been dealing with all along? Still, I appreciated Emma's honesty and her effort to mend fences. She told me she hoped we could meet someday under better circumstances. Through mutual cousins, I started hearing more about the cracks forming in Dad and Karen's carefully curated image. Their country club circle, where appearances meant everything, wasn't buying Karen's version of events. Word had spread about the wedding drama, and many of their friends were distancing themselves. Some even reached out to me privately, expressing their shock at how I'd been treated. One acquaintance told me that Karen's attempts to paint me as the villain were backfiring. People were starting to see her for who she really was, controlling, manipulative, and unwilling to admit fault. While I wasn't one to revel in others' misfortune, it felt like long overdue karma. Then came another unexpected twist. Adam asked to meet me for coffee. At first, I was hesitant. I didn't know if I was ready to face him, especially after the way he'd failed to stand up for me at the wedding. But Emma's message had stuck with me, and I figured it was worth hearing him out. When we met, Adam looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was visibly nervous, and I could tell this conversation wasn't easy for him. He started by apologizing. Not just for the wedding, but for everything. Years of enabling Karen's behavior, ignoring how I'd been treated, and staying silent when he should have spoken up. Adam admitted that he'd always looked up to me, even when we were kids. He said he admired how I built my business from nothing, but he'd let Karen's narrative warp his perspective. He confessed that he'd been too scared to stand up to Dad and Karen because of how much control they had over his life. That's when he dropped a bombshell. Karen had convinced Dad to put most of their assets in her name, including partial ownership of Adam's condo. He'd only recently found out and felt blindsided. It explained a lot about why he felt trapped. He'd been living under the illusion of independence while Karen pulled the strings behind the scenes. Adam told me he was working with a financial advisor to untangle himself from their control. He and Emma were also looking for a new place to live, somewhere that wouldn't be tied to Karen or Dad in any way. Hearing this gave me hope. It sounded like Adam was finally starting to see the bigger picture and take steps toward breaking free from the toxic dynamic we'd grown up in. Before we left, Adam asked if we could rebuild our relationship. He said he missed having me in his life and wanted to make things right. I didn't have an answer for him in that moment. Part of me wanted to give him a chance, but another part of me couldn't forget how many years of silence I'd endured. I told him I needed time to think. After that meeting, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that Adam was finally taking responsibility, anger at the years of hurt, and cautious optimism about the possibility of mending things. But one thing was clear. The wedding had been a catalyst, shaking the foundation of our family's toxic dynamics. For the first time in years, it felt like there was a glimmer of hope, not just for Adam and me, but for the future of what family could mean. After meeting with Adam, I spent days processing everything. His apology felt genuine, but years of hurt and resentment aren't something you can just brush aside with a single conversation. The fact that Emma had pushed him to reflect on his actions meant a lot, but it also made me wonder why it took someone else to force him to see what I'd been dealing with all this time. Hearing Adam admit that he'd felt trapped under Dad and Karen's control was eye-opening. It gave me a new perspective. I'd spent so many years assuming Adam was complicit in their behavior, but it seemed like he'd been as much a victim of Karen's manipulation as I had. That didn't excuse everything, but it made me realize the situation was more complicated than I'd thought. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't done trying to stir up trouble. Despite the cease and desist letter, she continued making passive-aggressive moves behind the scenes. She started calling mutual acquaintances and even some of my clients, spreading lies about me and my business. It was infuriating, but I knew better than to let her antics derail me. My legal team stayed on top of it, documenting every attempt she made to defame me. If she kept pushing, we'd escalate, but honestly, I was exhausted by the constant need to defend myself. I poured my energy into my work instead, focusing on the clients and events that had been coming in at a surprising rate since the wedding drama. The irony of the situation was that the chaos had somehow boosted my business. Several wedding guests reached out after the incident, impressed by how my staff handled everything. Some even booked us for their own events. It felt surreal to gain clients from such a messy situation, but it was a reminder of why I'd worked so hard to build a company that could handle anything. Around this time, I received another message from Emma. She wanted to thank me for meeting with Adam and shared that they were making progress in couples counseling. She mentioned they were actively looking for a new condo and taking steps to distance themselves from Dad and Karen. She also told me they were planning a small vow renewal ceremony in a few months, something intimate and drama-free. Hearing this made me feel a strange sense of hope. Adam and Emma were creating boundaries and redefining what family meant for them. It was something I'd struggled to do for years, but seeing them take those steps gave me a glimmer of optimism. Maybe change was possible. On the other hand, things weren't going well for Dad and Karen. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that their social circle at the country club had started to turn against them. The wedding fiasco had made the rounds, and people were questioning the version of events Karen had been spreading. Apparently, Karen's narrative of me being the villain wasn't holding up. People were starting to see through her facade, and the social standing she valued so much was beginning to crumble. As petty as it sounds, I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. After years of watching her manipulate and control everything around her, it seemed like the consequences were finally catching up. But despite the schadenfreude, I didn't let myself dwell on it too much. I'd spent enough of my life tied to their toxicity, and I didn't want to waste any more energy on them. Instead, I focused on the things that mattered: my business, my employees, and the relationships I still valued. One of those relationships was with Adam. He reached out again, asking if we could meet up for lunch. I hesitated at first, but after some thought, I agreed. This time, the conversation felt lighter, less weighed down by the past. He shared more about his plans to separate financially from Dad and Karen. He'd found a financial advisor who was helping him untangle the mess Karen had created. Hearing him talk about reclaiming his independence was encouraging. He told me he felt like he was finally taking control of his life. It was something I could relate to deeply, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were on the same page. Before we parted, Adam thanked me again for listening. He admitted he didn't expect me to forgive him overnight, but he hoped we could keep rebuilding our relationship. I told him I appreciated his effort, and while I wasn't ready to completely let my guard down, I was willing to give it time. As the days went on, I found myself reflecting more on what family meant. For so long, I'd been stuck in a cycle of resentment and anger, but seeing Adam and Emma make real changes gave me a renewed sense of possibility. Maybe it wasn't about fixing everything, but about finding the people who truly wanted to move forward and letting go of the rest. I decided to focus on what I could control. Karen and Dad's drama was their own burden to bear. I had a business to run, employees to support, and a life to live, and for the first time in years it felt like I was finally free to do just that. In the weeks after my second meeting with Adam, life started to settle down. Karen's attempts to sabotage my business had been neutralized, and the noise from Dad and her social circle had finally quieted. It was a strange feeling, like the calm after a storm. I wasn't naive enough to believe the drama was completely over, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had some breathing room. Adam and I continued to rebuild our relationship, cautiously but steadily. We started texting more often, with short updates about work, life, or things we'd seen that reminded us of growing up. It was a small but meaningful shift. One day, he sent me a photo of an old board game we used to play as kids. His caption read, "Still terrible at this, by the way." It made me laugh, not just because of the memory, but because it felt like the first genuine connection we'd shared in years. Meanwhile, Emma kept me updated on their progress. She and Adam had finally moved into a new condo, cutting all financial ties to Karen and Dad. She said the process wasn't easy. Karen, predictably, had tried to guilt them into staying connected, claiming they were abandoning family, but Adam stood his ground. She told me she'd never been prouder of him. Emma also mentioned that they were still planning their vow renewal ceremony. It would be a small, intimate event, and they'd decided to invite only a handful of people. She said she hoped I'd consider coming. It was a kind gesture, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. The wounds from the wedding were still fresh, and the thought of stepping into another family event, even a much smaller one, felt daunting. At the same time, I could feel myself softening toward Adam. His efforts to change weren't just surface level. He was actively working to take responsibility for his choices, and that meant something. But forgiving isn't the same as forgetting, and I knew it would take time to fully trust him again. As for Dad and Karen, they'd gone unusually quiet. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that their reputation at the country club had taken a serious hit. It turns out the very people they'd tried to impress with their carefully curated image were the first to distance themselves when the truth about the wedding drama came out. Karen apparently was furious, but she had no one left to manipulate into taking her side. The silence from Dad felt different, though. It wasn't anger or retaliation, it was absence. For all his bluster about suing me after the wedding, he hadn't reached out since. A part of me wondered if he was grappling with the fallout in his own way, but another part of me didn't care. I'd spent years chasing his approval, only to be met with dismissal and favoritism. Letting go of that need felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. Despite everything, I didn't regret how I handled the wedding. My decision to pull my catering team wasn't about revenge, it was about standing up for myself. I'd been treated as an outsider for so long that I finally decided enough was enough. If Dad and Karen couldn't respect me, they didn't deserve my support. Simple as that. That resolve gave me a sense of closure I hadn't expected. It wasn't the neat, clean ending I might have wished for, but it was real, messy, and human. Sometimes standing up for yourself means breaking away. Even if it leaves scars. Work became my anchor. The influx of new clients and opportunities following the wedding fiasco gave me a sense of pride. People recognized the professionalism of my team, and that validation reminded me of why I started my business in the first place. I even took some time to meet with my employees, thanking them for how they handled the chaos that night. Their loyalty and dedication were a testament to the culture we'd built together, and it made me proud to lead such a resilient team. As for Adam, I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. When he reached out to invite me over for dinner, a quiet evening with just him and Emma, I accepted. It felt strange walking into his new condo, seeing a space that wasn't tied to Karen or Dad in any way. Emma greeted me warmly, and Adam looked genuinely happy to see me. We spent the evening talking about everything except the past, work, hobbies, even a few funny stories from their move. For the first time in years, it felt easy, like the tension that had always hung between us was starting to fade. When I left that night, Adam walked me to my car and thanked me again for giving him a chance. I told him it wasn't about chances. It was about effort, and so far, he was putting in the work. That dinner felt like a turning point, not just for my relationship with Adam, but for how I saw my family as a whole. I realized I didn't have to carry the burden of fixing everything. Some relationships weren't worth saving, but others, like the one I was rebuilding with Adam, deserved the effort. As for Karen and Dad, I've made peace with keeping them at arm's length. They've shown me who they are, and I'm finally okay with letting go. Life's too short to hold on to toxic connections, and while I can't say for certain what the future holds, I know I'm walking away from this chapter stronger and more sure of myself than ever before. Looking back, I don't regret standing up for myself at the wedding. It wasn't easy, and it came with consequences, but it also forced a reckoning that was long overdue. Adam and Emma are building something new. I'm focused on my business and the relationships that bring me joy. And as for Dad and Karen, they can live with the choices they made, just as I'll live with mine. This isn't the ending I imagined, but it's one I can live with. And in the end, that's enough story too. It's time to raise a chair. In the lounge today, we have another fantastic story for you. If you're not prepared for life to return with a bang, don't be speculating. In the lounge today, perhaps Opie's mother-in-law could get a 23 and create it before blaming others if she is thus ignorant about genetics. My mother-in-law believes I cheated. So am I the jerk for smacking her? I read it. I need some help, so I threw this away. I'm not sure if I should tell my spouse I'm sorry for slapping my mother-in-law in front of him yesterday. To put things in perspective, I am mixed and my spouse is white. My father is Caucasian and my mother is Puerto Rican. My dad is rather pale and my mom has really dark complexion. For those who don't know, I'm quite white passing, so until I tell you a running game, you can't really tell that I'm Latina. My maternal grandpa is likewise incredibly fair, so it's a joke that melanin skips a generation. However, my maternal great-grandmother is really brown. Now that's out of the way, let me discuss my circumstances. I quote, "We've been married for 5 years and have been with my spouse for 7. When our 3-year-old daughter was born, she was the joy of my existence. She had a reasonably olive skin, dark brown eyes, and a head full of dark brown hair. When I become tanned, she looks like myself. Her Latino heritage is very visible. My mother-in-law has convinced herself that my daughter is not my husband, even though she is aware of all of this. Since her son's child could not possibly be that color, she has been telling everyone who would listen that I must have had an affair. Yes, how pleasant. I've always had a distant relationship with my mother-in-law. She was always more courteous than anything else, and never really tried to get to know me. In the past, my mother-in-law has made casual remarks about Latinos, but my husband would dismiss them as being from a different era. I want her to dismiss her actions as the result of her lack of education. Now that I think about it, I made a mistake by allowing her to continue. This is what my mother-in-law was saying when my husband and I learned about it via our sister Dash in Dash Law. We asked her to come over and discuss this. I sincerely hoped that we could resolve this, but instead, my mother stopped ranting for about 15 minutes. She exposed herself as a racist, claiming that she had known from the beginning what would happen and that ladies like me were incapable of self-control. It was my daughter's nerves that allowed me to pass her off. Some fairly colorful insults, too. She hadn't even entered the home, leaving my husband and I stunned. There was a shriek at the door. When she began disparaging my mother, claiming that she most likely done the same to my father, I finally snapped out of it. I had no idea what hit me next. I slapped her so hard that her glasses went off. Even though I've never punched someone before, that quote S what prompted my hubby to speak, or rather shouting at me and his mother for our behavior. The mother-in-law began to scream. Indeed, I ought not to have struck her. Even though I know it's bad, I think my mother-in-law was more upset when he implied that I was at fault. I informed him that he shares his mother's racism. While he was attempting to calm his mom down, I took my keys from inside the house and fled, if he was implying that I was just as evil as her. I took a car to a motel and stayed the night. I haven't left the hotel room since, and it is already midday. I'm checking in. My husband has been attempting to get in touch with me, as have a number of other friends and relatives. My only response was to let my sister-in-law know that I was safe in a hotel and to urge her not to let my husband know which hotel I was staying at. I'm beginning to feel guilty and am doubting everything I did. I let my mother-in-law act in this way, which led her to believe that I was unfaithful. Does my spouse believe that I cheated? This is the reason behind the mother-in-law's mental state. Naturally, should I apologize to my husband for striking my mother-in-law? I detest making excuses, and I know that violence is terrible, but I simply couldn't stand it when someone spoke negatively about my family. So should I tell my hubby I'm sorry? How can we overcome this? I would appreciate any and all suggestions. No edit. There was no sign of my daughter at home. We sent her to stay with my sister's family for the weekend. I'm going to come get her tomorrow afternoon. Edit 2. You can see the change I made on my page. Europe is not the wrong place for you. Behaving as though it's improper to defend your ancestry and kid. Tell your hubby you're sorry. A little one for the smack, perhaps, because the solution is not violence. But does he have to give you a big apology for not standing up for you and your kid right away? You bet, I see. The update was published 2 days ago. Tell me about the day I slapped my mother-in-law because she believes I cheated. We appreciate all of the extremely wise counsel that was provided. After much introspection, I managed to schedule an urgent consultation with my therapist for this morning. My sister is the only person here. 5 years ago, my parents returned to Puerto Rico to be with my grandparents. I want to respond quickly to a few questions. What is our age? I recently celebrated my 30th birthday, and my hubby is 28. I was 23, and he was 21 when we first met. Where had my daughter gone? In preparation for a stay with my sister's family over the weekend, I texted it to my sisters on Friday. We had some mommy-daughter time at Costco, her favorite store, after I picked her up on Monday afternoon. It's true that my 3-year-old adores Costco. After supper, we arrived home at approximately 7. When the child was definitely asleep, I informed my husband, who was waiting, that we would chat after she went to bed. Was that, and had a lengthy discussion on raising culture in addition to the fight, and his mother. I seen how my family was treated because of the color of their skin, and although my spouse acknowledges that racism exists, he acknowledged that he has never fully understood its complexity, particularly colorism. Many of you rushed to the conclusion that he would leave me or take my children and go. I hate to break the news to you, but we are not divorcing or anything. After apologizing to me for not defending me before, he said that he didn't want to associate his mother with racism. In the end, beating her doesn't help us. Therefore, I also apologize for that. He stated he would probably smack them too if it hadn't been his mother saying it, but he did forgive me. A marital counselor is what we're going to see. We made the decision in the hopes of locating an interracial marriage specialist. Due to her ethnicity, our daughter will have difficulties in the future. We want to know how to protect her and uplift her so she doesn't feel embarrassed of her ancestry, since, regrettably, racism still exists. We quote, V decided to cut off all communication with her and anyone attempting to help us communicate with her. She won't speak to my daughter again till years have passed, and she exhibits notable behavioral improvements. Tomorrow, my husband will drive over to her house to let him know what we decided. If the mother-in-law is willing to pay, I would think about getting a DNA and paternity test. This is not something I want to entertain on my own expense. We've also made the decision to keep this information private. It is up to them, not us, if people choose to believe her tale. My spouse is aware that our child is his. Ironically, she resembles him more than I do. He even gave her curls. I sincerely hope that this is my final update. I may return if anything else occurs. Once again, I want to thank everyone who provided insightful guidance. Although I'm disappointed that my daughter won't have a grandma in the U.S., it gives us even more motivation to arrange vacations to Puerto Rico. To awaken his eyes, nothing works better than a good smack on the mother-in-law. Avoiding touch is the best course of action. Let S be truthful. A bigoted grandmother attempting to erase her background is not necessary for a daughter. 5 hours ago, a new update was published. The second update. Does my mother-in-law believe that I cheated? Thus am I the bad one for slapping her? Hi, everyone! For want of a better phrase, I believe I jinxed myself when I said in the first update that I hoped this would be my final entry. Crap keeps getting worse. I hate to disappoint those of you who believe that I should be arrested for hitting my mother-in-law, but she is not pursuing charges. All of this is because my spouse promised to reveal my father-in-law's numerous indiscretions. Indeed, it has come to light that my father-in-law had many affairs with my mother-in-law before to his passing 2 years ago. Even on his deathbed, according to his husband, he was paying for sexual favors. Given that the mother-in-law and father-in-law seem to have a lovely marriage, this is really upsetting. It seems to have been a spectacle. I have no idea how my husband is feeling. He told me that he felt a great deal of regret for preserving it for me, but he also felt shame because his parents' marriage wasn't what they claimed it was. My spouse, and I have yet to find a couples therapist with expertise in multiracial relationships. In addition, the husband is searching for a personal therapist. His eyes were awakened to several more traumas and problems that he believes haven't been adequately resolved after the talk with his mother-in-law. The fact that he took these actions makes me very proud. Now let's talk about the Wednesday chat. Naturally, I made this update in order to continue venting. As I mentioned in my initial post, my husband visited my mother-in-law's home to let her know that her actions were inappropriate and that they would not be communicating with her going forward. This did not sit well with my mother-in-law. She informed her husband that he couldn't keep her away from her, which is ironic. Only grandchild. It's funny since she claimed our daughter wasn't his for the entire week. To cover up my obvious affair, she responded with colorful comments, saying that he was never this way before he met me and that this was all my idea. According to my husband, she may pay for a paternity test and apply to identify my affair partner if she is so sure that I am cheating and that our kid is his. A fair companion that doesn't exist, you know. According to the husband, the mother-in-law is based on a humorous shade of red. He further claims that there was steam emanating from her years. At that point, the mother-in-law threatened to file charges. The spouse said that he would just inform everyone about his father-in-law. The mother-in-law, who is known for cheating, reportedly broke down in tears and then went to her knees. He was unable to leave her, so he wailed. Husband simply shoved her away and walked away. She blew up her husband's phone until he got home, at which point he blocked her, even though I had previously banned her number so she couldn't reach me. Her husband will write her an email reminding her that he has no contact and that she will not be seeing any of us until she can demonstrate that she has received assistance, admits her mistake, and apologizes. After calling us to obtain the inside scoop, her husband's 2 sisters promise to correct anybody who attempts to contact us on her mother-in-law or who tries to spread her conspiracy beliefs. Anyone interested in supporting her can apply and crowdfund for a paternity test. Our money has been accumulated for too long to be squandered on a crazy woman's rants. My spouse, and I did read the blog's comments. I did explain it to him and show him, and we both appreciate your encouragement and insightful remarks. For those who are questioning me and suggesting that I should be arrested, my husband has a particular message. Use Zelle to obtain EFT. I consider myself fortunate to have this man as both my spouse and the father of my young daughter. I adore him. We will take our daughter to Texas Roadhouse to celebrate the passing of our mother-in-law. Despicable Me is wishing everyone love and thanking you again for all of your support while eating an absurd number of rolls. Edit. I neglected to include this, but she also threatened the grandparents' rights, claiming that I put my kid in danger by using my autoimmune illness medicine while pregnant. Even if we don't think you'll follow through on that, we'll nonetheless get legal advice. She has nothing except threats. I hope all is well with you. It was wise to block the mother-in-law's phone. That type of poisonous energy is unnecessary. And the sister taking the initiative to correct the record? That is the epitome of family unity. Crowdfund a paternity test for the conspiracy theorist. Watching minions spread mayhem while consuming an excessive amount of carbohydrates is the epitome of triumph. Hopefully this will be your final update. I hope. How do you interpret this? Which of your mother-in-law's claims is the most ridiculous? We appreciate you visiting us in your lounge today and want you to share your tales with us in the comments section below. To ensure you don't miss our next video, please press the notification bell, like, and subscribe. See you shortly, and return your chair to its original location.